But you have to be born on the embassy.
Yeah.
Because that's considered sovereign territory, like natural soil.
You want us to go ahead and roll here?
Awesome.
All right. All right. Hey, this is our first panel, I think, of the film festival. This is the horror panel, appropriately enough, for Something Wicked Film Festival. And I'm Jim Adams. I do a podcast called Monster Attack about old horror films. You're gonna be hearing about a lot of that this week and all these shameless plugs. And with me is someone I just met. Gus. Tell me who you are. And
I'm Gus Cabrera. I directed, wrote, and produced a film that's world premiering here today. It's called Cul-de-sac Shadow of the Abyss.
nice.
Originally, we shot that back in 2016, and like any movie, it's a suspense horror. But to me, when I think of horror, I think the greatest horror is humanity and its capabilities of what it can do, beyond the supernatural or monster.
Yeah.
And I love to really delve into those aspects of humanity. And this particular movie that I did I was inspired actually by real events in my neighborhood. A veteran who had suffered PTSD, and watching the outcome and what the ramifications of somebody like that who goes either untreated, unnoticed, and not ever being able, like you try to reach out to them and you see them spiraling, and it's part them and it's part the system.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's one of those things that I love about when I think of horror. I think of, I think of John Carpenter, who basically raised me.
Nice.
My story for that was, I'm a first generation American. My parents came from Central America, worked, they had their own businesses. But my dad came to this country when he was like 10, and he grew up with the Howard Hawks.
Oh, yeah.
The Thing. So.
Yeah.
I think my first exposure to Carpenter was sitting around with my uncles, and this is in the 80s. I was probably maybe 8 or 9, and we're watching Escape from New York,
Nice.
which is a fantastic movie, one of my all-time favorites. And it's maybe not horror, but more dystopian.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that right there, I was like hooked. I was like, wow, this is great. And I mean, an 8 or 9-year-old watching this. My dad, my uncle and my dad's like, it's a man movie, it's action, and it's okay, he can watch that. And then the horror aspect came when, I think it was the next year when John Carpenter came out with The Thing, the remake. And for me, the way I got to see that at 10, which probably most people are going, what is wrong with your parents? The funny story there goes that my whole family decided we're going to go see E.T. So E.T. that year came out. And back then, the movie theater was back in Metairie, Louisiana. It was divided into 4 little separate movie sections. Mm-hmm. And they were like, okay, we're going to see E.T. The whole family, oh, great. We go see E.T., sold out, but they're seats, but they're scattered everywhere.
Right.
So my dad being he was the Air Force, and he's very kind of a grit, kind of like, he goes to the manager, give me my money back, you lied to me, you don't sell tickets, leave my kid alone in the first row. So the guy's like, here's the money back, sorry. And then as we're leaving, he didn't want to lose the evening. He goes, oh, look, The Thing. I love The Thing. The Howard Hawks version of The Thing was awesome when I was a kid. Your grandfather would show that to us because back then, I guess Pepsi he worked for, they'd give the families movies, the real reels.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
As kind of a bonus, for an employee. And they would sit there and show this thing. And so my dad goes, we're going to see The Thing. And it's my mom, my brother, it's my aunt. And my brother at the time was 7. And we go see John Carpenter's The Thing. And the first thing I walk into I hear is, who MF in my dirty drawers? And I'm like, what? And my mom is we're all sitting down. And mom's like, no, don't worry, it's John Carpenter. It's going to be just action-packed. It's all guys, so there's not going to be any sexual situations. And
so she obviously had never seen Halloween, I guess.
No, they don't. And my brother and I watched through it, and we loved it. My mom was obviously just freaking out. My dad, of course, was just like, this is great. I'm cool with it. And so when we got home, I was probably the most terrified I've ever been as a child. Because all I could think of was that walking spider head is going to be somewhere in my room. So being that my dad was also he was an individual who wanted us to be very manly children, and I had a BB gun at 3. why you give a kid a BB gun 3? I don't know, but for him, he was like, here.
What a cool dad.
And I got that BB gun, and I literally was sat and slept with it, going, if this thing comes after me, in my mind, if knowing that this is not real, but it was so well done, that movie, and it influenced me pretty much in the way that, as part of my, through my life, I just started in this career.
Now, had you ever seen the original one?
Yeah, I did with the different kind of different takes. Still, loved it, and I think it came from it came from there was a story I thought there was something Knox or something, but I remember the Howard Hawks version. I saw it maybe once when I was like 14.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was influenced by the UFO craze was huge, just coming off on the heels of the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and it's from a short story called "Who Goes There."
That's it. Yeah, Who Goes There? And I mean, that's to me. I was like, I got into the thing. I got into the horror, reading and studying it. It's part of, you don't have to go to film school. You can really do self-study.
Absolutely.
And if you really become a fan of something, you will delve into it and you'll learn and you'll see the process. Now, I know from the thing, the guy who created all those creatures, he went a little crazy.
Yeah.
But you learn that there's a real...
That's true, and this is pre-CGI.
Yeah.
So the most you did back then was maybe a little blue screen, but that wouldn't have worked on that. So these are all practical effects.
But like Halloween, I watched, of course.
Stan Winston's.
Oh, yeah. Stan Winston started. He also got the CG thing going. And,
he did. He made a nice move into that.
Yeah, and he really brought that to the element of Hollywood. But for me, for horror, when I would look at Halloween, another great one by John Carpenter. Even They Live, to me, is it's a horror science fiction.
A very underrated film.
Yeah, absolutely, with political aspects and tones in it that are just today. I think you can still draw from that.
I think the horror from that film. Yeah, you're right. 20, 25 years later. Yeah, with what's going on right now, I could see some things that would make people very, very scared. Thinking, man, they knew back then. They saw some of this coming, and it's unbelievable. Yeah, I saw that. And I'm not a political kind of person. Other than I think as a filmmaker, I think real great filmmakers are observers. They're not necessarily injecting what they're. Sometimes you can't help. You'll have your bias, but I think they want a real great filmmaker will observe what's going on and try best to relate it to the masses, without what I call the him and all grunt. It goes this way or it goes that way. I think Spielberg is one of those guys who does it so well that and when now to me the other one is now Christopher Nolan coming around. Oh, he is definitely definitely come to the forefront a lot of that. And I think he brings that where there's that element where he can inject what's going on. Like the last Dark Knight trilogy. I think it was played off of wasn't it Dickens, off of a tale of pretty much Tale of Two Cities. And that's how I see as a filmmaker, like especially when you're talking horror. Horror is such a great genre to get into, and you can express so many elements, and you can bring so. Well, look at the directors who now are considered sort of top mainstream directors who started in the horror genre, and I know, and for a lot of filmmakers in this area, especially, we do have the tax incentive and stuff, which is making it easier for filmmakers. The digital revolution's making it easier. They all started in horror. Because it's a great place, it's a great breeding ground. But I've got to ask you, Gus, one question. Since you were 7 years old when you first saw the remake of The Thing, now have you murdered anyone recently? No. Suffer any serious psychological trauma? I think that might also. I was raised Catholic, and I went to Catholic school. Oh my God, that's traumatic enough. And you're pretty much kind of given that little bit like if you do anything. God's watching, and you're like, I better not do that. But at the same time, I'm sitting watching these awesome movies to me. I'm like, I thank my dad for doing that. Well, I get a kick out of it. It seems like every generation there's this outrage towards horror. And, we've gotten a little more. Well, people say, we've gotten so graphic now. But when we found out what this panel was going to be, I looked a little back into this, thinking, this extends back farther than just film. I mean, you can go back even to the silent films. There were some horror films released then, but back to radio. You could go to radio to Orson Welles and absolutely. But you can even go back into the 19th century, and they had this little thing called Grand Guignol, which were stage plays. And they weren't traditional stage plays. They were graphic. They were bloody. There was a Showtime series that came out not too long ago that sort of played up on Grand Guignol. And I mean, these guys would stage murders and blood and monsters. And, we sort of came out of that okay. So I always get a kick out of it. I was 7 years old when I saw my first horror movie, or my first monster movie.
So you had a good dad, all right.
It's called The Giant Behemoth. It was a big monster, big dinosaur type film, but it was also an anti-radiation type film because this thing, like Godzilla, would spew out this radioactive beam that would melt people. And again, this film was shot 9 years after the bombing of Hiroshima, so there was a lot of fear still. We still didn't understand a lot of this stuff, but I mean. I introduced my nephew to monster movies, or we called them all monster movies.
Right.
Since then, it's become more refined. It's sort of like sports, with the different, the different jobs.
There's more segments than ever.
So, but back then, sci-fi, monsters, it was all monster movies. My nephew was 6 years old, and I decided, my lad, it is time to introduce you to Night of the Living Dead.
Oh yeah.
And I remember my sister freaking out when she walked into the house. I was babysitting for him, and she saw him watching Night of the Living Dead, and he was just he was in awe of the movie. And but I was explaining to him how the special effects work. I said, he's like, oh, he was getting a little creeped out when they started eating people. And I said, well, they use chicken for that. And they did. They used chicken skins. A lot of that are sausages and stuff like that. So in black and white back then, the way Romero shot it, it was really grotesque. I remember, even I watched it in high school when it came out. I was watching it at drive-in, and we were like horrified at the stuff they showed. But so when she walked in, it's freaking out. He goes, "Oh, Mom, they're eating chicken. It's okay." And she's like, "What are you doing to this child?" Of course, he's now a huge horror fan and hasn't killed anybody recently that I'm aware of. So.
And I think about that. I have an 8-year-old, and and I try not to expose her just yet because one, she's not really interested in pretty much.
She might be though.
She's interested in being scared, but she wants to do the scaring.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So she has her own. She got into her blood phase. She started taking her little pet shop characters and asking us for red icing. We're like, oh, okay, here you go. And next thing she starts squirting in it and making them like they're dying. And I'm like, are you filming this? She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. I'm at that crossroad. Do I intervene? Or do I let this creative outflow happen? Do I sit there and go, let's see where she's going?
As long as it's just frosting, yeah, I think.
Yeah,
okay.
But she's a normal child. She still plays with dolls. She likes pretty pink things, and there's still that element. She's not out there asking me, Dad, can I get a knife? Nope. I mean, there's none of that. And she still wants to film things. She likes to still play, pretend, and her and her friends. And she's actually in my movie that I'm going to be debuting here today. Right. She's in a quick scene, and she keeps begging me every day, when we make the big movie, can I be in it? And I'm like, sure, yeah, yeah. And I'm trying to first you got to let's focus on school. Yeah. But I know, I'm an avid video gamer. I love games. My Xbox, and I play whatever I can. And I'll play we talk about radio. I love a game called Fallout that has my
weakness.
It's got horror. It's got everything.
Got it all.
You could want, and I have to be careful around playing it because I'm like, there's heads blowing up, and I'm like, I'm thinking an 8-year-old boy, man. My wife over there could end up killing me if she always
got monsters. It's got it all. Yep.
She shouldn't be seeing that, And I'm like, okay, but then I'm like, wait, she's still playing with icing blood and doing these things with these weird little characters she's got. I'm like, I don't know, but from my perspective with that, it's I don't think horror is the blame. It's just like rock and roll music, and people say rap, and they say every other genre of something that people that they don't understand, they're afraid of. But I think horror is just one of the best ways. I was at Austin Film Festival a couple of years ago, and I met one of the ladies who wrote the Guardians of the Galaxy script.
Nice. Okay.
And it was James Gunn that came in, that he took it over. But James Gunn started in horror.
Oh yeah.
He started with Trauma.
Yep.
And then he ended up writing the Dawn of the Dead remake.
Right, the remake one. That's right.
And that launched him right up. into getting Guardians, and once he got that, and you just think of these stepping stones, these people, take J.J. Abrams, all of
That's
them go
right.
through the same avenues that, and I think that horror has still a lot more to offer. I think there's a lot of creativity.
Well, I think when you're dealing with the fantastical, and that's really what we're talking about.
Right.
It's the most expressive and creative genre that you can probably, and of course, we've all known science fiction. It's been that way. But the monster stuff, yeah, I mean, it goes back. I mean, you can go back to ancient Rome and some of the ancient Greek writings of sea monsters and monsters from the heavens and things like that. And I think there's a definitive need that life is scary. I mean, life is it's a scary proposition. I'm learning now. When I was a kid, I thought, if I get to that age, I'm going to know it all. And now it's like scary as hell. It's even more scary now than it was when I was a kid. But you've got to have that release, and I think it's like, why do people go on roller coasters?
Yeah.
Why do people go through haunted house things or whatever? They like being scared because it's an emotional release that, in a crazy way, helps us keep our sanity. I think
it does.
Sometimes. It really do.
And I love the fact that with horror, when I think of it, the great thing about horror is that anybody you can pick up a camera now, you can get into it, and you can make anything you want. And it doesn't have to be blood and guts always. It can be so many different aspects. I mean, I sit there. I mean, I'm a futurist in the sense that I'm always thinking ahead, what's to come, what's scary. And to me, the scariest thing that yet it's there is, what happens when people are jobless, when the automation comes,
Absolutely,
when the robots, when the AI systems take over. Where are we going to go? How scary? What happens when all your medical records are all digitized and there's machine servicing you? And then I really think, what happens if there's an element of a criminal mind set to say, I'm going to poke around in somebody's file and then really I can murder them from halfway around the world.
Oh, yeah, we've seen, and there have been a couple of films that sort of touched on that, how vulnerable we are, how we've become so dependent on the computer age, and we are very vulnerable.
And we are.
There's no privacy anymore.
And that to me is the most, it's so horror. It's like seeing your life completely like just taken over. And then I tell my wife, I go, my brother's a doctor and he's telling me about all these different robots that cut into you. And all I keep thinking is, man, I can make a movie about some crazy deranged psycho who's out there, who's a cyber criminal who can sit there and hammer in, and he can wreak havoc with a robot cutting up people and, or switching people's, appendages and all kinds of the fantastical, like you said, just going out and going for it.
Well, and I think you touched on something, Gus, even right in the very beginning, that some of the most horrific type stories, the most horror stories, are ones that deal with what's inside of us. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be big monsters, big lizards walking around, or ghosts or spirits or whatever like that. And I think, when I think back, growing up, and again, when I got started in horror films, there was no going back. I mean, it was like, I don't want to say an addiction because I don't want to put that kind of negative connotation on it, but I couldn't get enough of it.
But it's a major fandom.
It's just, and we're going to touch on this in a panel coming up this afternoon called Defining My Life Through Monster Movies.
Right.
Because they certainly did make who I am today, which might be an argument against monster movies. I don't know. But thinking back to what movies scared me the most, and one that comes to mind had nothing to do with monsters. It had nothing to do with any of your traditional type horror elements, and it was the movie In Cold Blood. And what made that one so frightening was not only was it about two guys who were on a killing rampage and slaughtered this family out in Kansas, but it was true. It was a true story.
That's the Truman Capote,
fact
right?
That man could get so low that they could do what these two guys did.
That was the Truman Capote.
Yeah, the Truman Capote.
Oh, yeah, that was brilliant.
And
that to me was
with Robert Blake.
Yeah,
that was the best one.
I saw the other one. The
other one sort of missed the key elements,
Yeah.
I think, but. And the fact it was black and white, I think, made it almost like a nightmare. And that, to me, was one of the scariest films I saw growing up. I mean, that haunted me for the longest time. Even your home isn't safe.
No.
These guys lived in Kansas. Nothing happens in Kansas.
I've been through Kansas.
Yeah, it's the heart of America.
Yeah,
and I think there were all of those elements that came together and made this just such a shocking film. And absolutely, anyone who doesn't call that a horror film, I go look at Silence of the Lambs, the first quote-unquote horror film to win Best Picture for Academy Award. You know, people argue, say, well, no, it's not really a horror film. Really? I mean, I'm sorry, he's having, some guy's liver with a bottle of Chianti. Come on. I mean, it's how much, what level do we have to go to call something horror?
I don't know because I'm thinking there's a guy named Buffalo Bill out there skinning women.
Yeah, that's right.
And wearing them as clothes. If that doesn't tell me Leatherface is like, that's the son of Leatherface. That's it. Hey, he evolved. And speaking of Kansas, I've been to Kansas, and I got to tell you that we got lost in Kansas, my wife and I. We were going to a football game. And I'll never forget, I said, we're going to road trip from Texas and go up there. And I got lost, and it was dark, and I took a backcountry road. And I saw the burned out barn, the windmill, all the,
you were living a horror film there.
Creepiest elements. And it's awesome in the sense that when you experience that, it really, you can put something definitive and create and write. And I'll write little short things like, down on the farm, thinking about characters. Here's this.
Was it raining?
No, it was not raining.
Because otherwise, you almost have House of a Thousand Corpses.
It was just scary enough to where you have that just you can see the silhouette of all that, and just you think like there's going to be a scarecrow guy. He's going to jump at me with the sickle, or there's hillbillies from hell coming around, and they're going to run us off the road. And my wife is going to be like beaten up. I'm going to get like tortured in front of her. And I'm like thinking through my mind, she's just sitting there just holding her teeth going, where's the gas station? Where's the gas station? Just get us to a gas station, which we finally got. Luckily we survived. We're now here. But, those are things that I know, like when I think of horror, it's always on my mind. And so many genres. I'm always also thinking of science fiction and all the other things, but always thinking what scares me. What keeps me up at night besides mortgage payments and things like that.
That's pretty horrific.
Yeah. The future of my kid. What's her future going to look like? But I remember you were talking about one of the movies that always scares me still to this day, and it's my Catholic upbringing that I still go back to, and it goes back to Carpenter when he did The Prince of Darkness.
Oh. Another underrated film.
That it's one of my cherished. I love it just because I see there's layers, and I love movie with layers that you can go back and watch again, and you'll miss things because the element of that one is like of horror, supernatural, and then science and quantum mechanics, which when you read about him, he was for some reason John Carpenter was like, I got into quantum mechanics. I'm like, what? You're a horror. You're like the Godfather. You are of horror, and you're getting into quantum mechanics. So I'm having to go. Okay, what is his angle? What? Yeah. And it's interesting to know. Why he's going in. Okay, yeah, he wanted to marry the supernatural with the science.
Sure.
So I go back to this day. When I watch that movie, I still have chills because I think about it because of the isolationism. That's his whole.
The incredible Donald Pleasence, who was like one of the best actors in the genre.
I still love him in The Great Escape.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's another. If you've never seen it, The Great Escape, one of the best. It's not a horror film. Well, I don't know. A bunch of guys in German.
It's a true story.
Yeah.
And then what happened to them was pretty horrific.
Yeah. They put a little more comical but serious edge to it. But Donald Pleasence in that was fantastic. Of course, there were so many great actors that came out of that movie. Yeah. But no, and I think like when I was if y'all get a chance to see my movie today, mine has like the horror elements, but it's more. There's a psychological element to it.
And I think I've seen a real trend in that direction. I know the stuff I like to write is more psychologically based,
right?
Because I think that's more horrific to people, but. It's been fun to sort of watch the metamorphosis of horror over the years. And in some ways, we're coming back around to Grand Guignol, I think, a little bit.
A little bit back to blood.
We went through that with the splatter age or whatever, the 70s and definitely the 80s with what I call the slice and dice movies, which actually I found sort of boring. I didn't want to see it all thrown up on the screen. It's like the old argument, and again, I've had people argue that Alien is not a horror film. Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's sci-fi, but that's a pretty good monster. No, I wouldn't want to go up against something that if you shoot it, it bleeds acid out at you, But the difference between Alien and Aliens, which I think is more of an action film.
Yeah, exactly.
But in that movie, you never really see the monster. I mean, you just get snippets of it. You see it in shadows.
Right.
You do get one quick burst of it at the end, and that's it.
That's
and
it.
That made that film brilliant.
But
I mean, it's so frightening.
that's one of the other ones. Those two movies right there are also part of my childhood. My dad made sure we watched Alien. We sat there through that, and I watching Ridley Scott doing what he does with minimal budget.
Yeah.
And by the way, Aliens, the sequel, was done with minimal budget. James Cameron told me, he said, I wrote the script, a natural progression for what would be, like you said, that was more of a roller coaster ride.
It really was, yeah.
And using, when you talk, you see some of the things that they do in there, you're like, wow, I didn't think about it. He's using mirrors to multiply the aspect of how many different soldiers are there. They only had 6 costumes for the alien, and they're just having a position in place. And when you read about how they're doing these things and why and how, and it's because they don't. He wanted to make sure his budgets were focused on certain effects, certain props, and he knew he could get away with just enough. But with Alien, they had I think 2 alien suits. And they hired this guy from, I forget, from one of the countries of Africa.
Yeah, because of the.
He was very long.
He was almost double jointed.
Yeah.
Because there were some shots in there. And if you ever get a hold of the DVD set, look at some of the scenes that were not used. And a lot of them involve seeing the alien full force. Because he had to literally almost walk like a bird.
It's just the way he walked was. It was so unnatural almost.
Yeah, they were trying to totally encapsulate H.R. Giger's artwork, which was brilliant at the time. None of us had ever seen it before. And talk about something alien.
Yeah, and I even saw Alien Covenant, which had aspects of it, and it wasn't.
I haven't seen that yet. I've been wanting to.
It's not a bad movie. It's not a perfect movie.
I actually like Prometheus.
I did too. I
thought that was.
Prometheus was a stronger horror movie in the sense because the Alien Covenant, I think they kind of I would like to see a little more, but I was fascinated by the whole concept of the engineers and everything. But I thought Prometheus was a horror movie. It was sci-fi,
It was.
but I mean it was scary with the way that had these that
Well,
black
I think the horror
goo
was
and
in
all.
trying to escape death. I mean, you got a guy who's obsessed with not wanting to die, and it's probably a horror we all deal with.
Everybody's
Eventually
gonna
have to just.
everyone faces it, or is
That's right.
it's inevitable. I think Woody Allen said, death and taxes.
Death and taxes.
It's inevitable. It's the one thing you're going to face. I mean, I think, wanting to live forever, which every day you read articles, we're going to, you can start seeing, if you can afford it, eventually in the future, you're going to be able to live forever.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking like, oh my goodness, do I really want to live forever? I mean, how horrible. I mean, do I really want to watch?
Well, we went through a stretch of that too back in the, many, many hundreds of years ago. It's called the Fountain of Youth. And it's like, haven't found it yet. So,
but, I sit there now, I was just like reading all these articles and I was like, those are just elements of horror. I'm like, I told my wife, I said, I don't think I want to live forever. I just don't. I think there's a time when I said, but I love the notion of, of man facing his fears.
Yeah.
Eventually. And like, I go back to all those movies like Prometheus and you go back to Aliens, you're fighting against a representation, but luckily we don't have that. I really don't think I'd want aliens running around here and having to fight them and, or Predator, which is another great movie that I loved.
Another very underrated.
And I consider that a horror movie in many ways. So, which, by the way, they're doing another one. I don't know if you know about that.
That's what I understand, yeah.
Which it's
it surprised me they wanted to remake that one because it's, on some of these reboots, some of them are okay, but, for the most part, I mean, something like Predator, something like Alien stuff, what made them so unique, I don't think you can ever match. There's very few of those that I thought were better than the originals.
With Alien and Aliens was just absolutely just it's James Cameron who just came off of Terminator and to sit there and go, wow, he took something and really, and then I thought, okay, well that's enough. We don't need to say anymore.
Yeah.
But I get it. The Hollywood system will tell they will run it rampant into the ground.
Oh, sure.
If it's
as long as it makes money.
And I started learning that. Like I said, I learned a lot when I went to when my first script, I did a high concept sci-fi script that placed in a second round over at Austin. So I got invited. I got to meet. I actually got to meet a guy named Roy Lee, who is if you ever seen a movie called The Ring.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He was the producer and pretty much the main guy that brought that from
That's
Korea.
another one that's based on a
Yeah.
Japanese film, but really messes with your head quite a bit.
I got to sit with him and talk to him. Now this guy, he also produced something else you probably all know. He also produced the Lego movie. He is responsible for that. And Batman and there's about 10 more Lego movies coming your way, he told me. And I'm sitting there like talking to him about how he did it, and he was a lawyer. He hated being a lawyer. And then he was like, he got a little break. A friend of his was in LA. Takes a little bit of luck. He told me, he says, it's going to take luck. He got a shot at becoming just a gopher producer, just very low lie. You read scripts. You read script. And he knew that in the Asian markets that they were doing great horror movies. And nobody was looking for it. Nobody in the stateside. And he, because of his Korean heritage, he could see a lot of these Asian films, and he ended up going. He's like, he goes to the producers of The Ring. He goes, I want to give it to me, and they're like, and he told me, he goes, they looked at me like, yeah, okay, sure, here, the Americans want to see this. He's like, no,
Open up a whole new genre here. Yeah.
And boom, that movie right there was one of the highest grossing horror movies for that year, and it opened up the doors for him with Warner Brothers. And that's how he kind of, he started bringing more horror, whatever he could find that he thought was a good story. But he said the big thing was, you have to read a lot of scripts and books and try to figure out what you can go find. Now with Lego Movie, it's kind of like you look around.
That may have some horror elements in another direction there. But.
He said he saw his kids playing Lego video games. His two daughters, he goes, calls a Warner. He told me, we called Warner up and they basically said, I want to do Lego Movie. They're like, we own all the properties for Lego for most of the stuff. Not a problem. Here's your money. Here's what you need. He said, cool, got it all rolling. He took another chance. I don't know if you know what Five Nights at Freddy's is?
No, that I don't know. No.
See, so that's a horror thing. Straight up video game horror.
Okay.
You can get it on your phone.
Okay.
Get the first one. It's basically
I'm really behind on the gaming, so yeah.
This one is
like I said, other than Fallout.
This one is imagine you're the security guard at a Chuck E. Cheese.
That's pretty horrific.
At night.
Yeah.
And the animatronics come to life, and they're going to rip you to shreds if you don't do so. Well, he bought the rights to that, and he's telling me, he said, we're getting ready to produce. He said, we're looking at producing this. I think there's another element of horror that I can apply. There's a whole fan base of children that I can kind of bring this out. He said, I don't know how I'm going to do it without getting too bloody, And he said, and that's where you see all these great horror, these movies are coming from. They're really right out in front of you. You just got to know how to go and pick them up.
Yeah.
And of course, have a big time deal with a major studio. But I'm hoping one day I'll get there.
Yes, that's right. I'm trying to visualize now the future of horror, where it's going to go. Because we've gone in so many different cycles, clearly coming out of the 40s and the 50s and some of the big bug films, all around radioactivity and atomic power and all that. The 60s, there was a lot of end of the world stuff, and I came from a generation that, and I've mentioned this many times on my podcast, and I know that some of my younger listeners may not really have a concept of this, but as kids in elementary school and even all the way up through high school, there probably wasn't one of us that thought we were going to die of natural causes. That's how the world was. We were just convinced that we were going to blow each other up. We had this incredible power, and there was nothing to suggest that we weren't just finally going to press the button. Of course, I don't know. Now we're getting a little worried again because things are getting a little goofy again. But
North Korea,
it calmed down there for a while, but now. It's getting a little crazy. But I mean, so a lot of the movies reflected that. You had a lot of post-apocalyptic type horror films and that sort of thing. And, a lot like Fallout, because I think that's one of the things that sort of almost, as weird as it sounds, that game was so much fun for me and still is so much fun for me because it taps into that whole power.
I just love the art. I love the whole.
Oh, the artwork is great.
The whole 50s and 60s element it brings.
Yeah, it's got this whole music, Art Deco thing it's
great. My family's business, we do interior decorating, and we're up in New Orleans, and our biggest clients are it's Hollywood South. Yeah. And we're constantly having to create things for those time periods, for the 50s. Sure. And I remember we were working for American Horror Story and doing some of their work. and they wanted things. There was a scene they wanted because they were shooting one that was set. It was set in the '60s. And they had to have the Art Deco, and it was very creepy looking stuff.
Oh yeah,
and you look at it and you're like, okay, I'm getting where they're going with this, and in a successful franchise that really comes out and playing in that era. But I love that the Art Deco is always there's something creepy.
There is something about it, yeah,
that always makes me go
very bizarre.
Ooh. But as far as where horror's going, that's the beauty of it. It can go everywhere and anywhere, and it can constantly it evolves. It comes back to the same things. I just hope I think there's always lessons in something somebody's saying in horror, why somebody enacts murder. Well, he was child abuse. Okay, great. We need to maybe focus it. Or there's a political ramification.
Yeah.
Or the fantastical. I mean, I
love seeing the big monster movies coming back because, you've got Monsters, you've got the remake of Godzilla, not the 98 one, but the one recently. Which I really liked.
With Bryan Cranston?
Yeah.
That was great.
Because Gareth Edwards brought in the elements that made Monsters so good.
And Pacific Rim. And they're doing the sequel to that.
That sort of takes me back to some of those great. But the thing is, nowadays, they're almost believable. I mean, they present it in a story where you go, that's not too fantastic to think about. That's maybe
giant robots are not too far off.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Jurassic Park, in the Crichton novels, which were far scarier than the movies, and I hate that Hollywood made them nice. They were still scary, but I mean, the original Jurassic Park, everybody dies. Except
Lord! I never read it. I never read
except for Jeff Goldblum. Oh well, I just spoiled it. 25 years spoiler alert. I do that all the time. On my
the Goldblum
podcast.
Character makes
but
it.
But everybody. I mean, Hammond, all of them, except for Doctor the Jeff Goldblum character.
The kids get eaten too.
Pretty much, yeah.
Nice. That's a good horror movie.
I mean, it is just gruesome. And then the second one is like nothing like that one, and that was I'll take issue with Steven Spielberg. I was like, hey, come on.
Well,
Steven.
obviously, yeah.
It turned it into a really bad Japanese horror film. It just didn't quite work.
See, I remember.
But, again, the whole concept of that with the DNA stuff and genetic engineering and stuff, it's just believable enough to think.
We're talking like Gattaca now.
Maybe that, yeah. I mean, maybe it could happen. The thing that always will stay in my mind when I went and saw that, because I wanted to read the book and loved it. So I got to go see this movie. And I got all the hype. Was I couldn't believe, you're talking about parents who don't want their kids to watch horror films, but I saw parents taking 5 and 6 year olds to go see Jurassic Park because hey, it's dinosaurs, and watching these kids traumatized as they're being hauled out of the theater because these monsters are eating people. It's like, I'm sorry, what part of that did you not understand?
I'll never forget when I was a kid. My dad took us back in New Orleans to this old movie theater. It's not there anymore. It was called the Robert E. Lee Movie Theater, and living in the South, that's what it is, you know. Yeah. And aliens were showing up, and I see this little girl outside crying. And as we're getting ready to go in the movie, they were seeing in theater too. And I'm like, my brother's like, man, that's awesome. It's going to be really good. And so we walked in, and of course, it was like awesome. But when it comes to the DNA and all that, I think of movies like Gattaca. I think of, you start reading the trends, and now currently what's, in China wants to bio-enhance their soldiers. All kinds of things that nobody knows what the outcome is. And like they call it the CRISPR tool, CRISPR-9, I don't know if you've ever heard about it. It's a new genetic sequencing tool. See,
yes.
You can basically take this. It's basically, think of an X-Acto knife on the DNA level.
Right.
They can cut out anything, and they can insert anything.
They're experimenting now on some bacteria that fights other bacteria.
Exactly.
And stuff,
You can actually rewrite your entire, like if you got a disease,
rewrite the code,
you can rewrite the code and change the disease out. But when you talk to these scientists, like, yeah, but we did that to a bunch of butterflies, and the butterflies came out horrifically looking, like their antennas were all messed up.
So it's like a fly.
Yeah, and I'm thinking holy smokes, we do this to some person, they're going to come out just like Jeff Goldblum's fly, like Brundle fly's going to come rolling around. I said, but I think those are avenues that need to really be explored, because I think horror also, just like anything, it brings out a message to everyone. What are we really doing here? And should we take our time? not to get political, but when you look at governments like China, they will railroad anything through just to get into the forefront ahead.
Well, I think, and that was a message that was actually brought up, and it was one of the, I thought, strong points of the Jurassic Park movie, was, when it was questioned, yeah, we can, but you could do it, but should we? And I think that's right now, I think we've seen that, we were talking about the horror of technology. I mean, some of the horror stories that could come out of that. And we're seeing where technology has far gone ahead of the ethics sort of structure of society.
Yeah.
And there's a real horrific element there as well. Just what you're talking about.
And it's funny you say that. I have some lines about that in my current movie. When technology ceases to gain advantages, you have to look to alternative philosophies. And that can apply to so many aspects of our world today, and the horror that we are in, and in many ways. And when I'm writing something, that I want my audiences to be not shocked, but to really think. Mm-hmm. I like for people, and I learned that from Nolan. That's one of the things. His stuff really kind of makes you think. There's also a lot of misdirection, which is fun. It's the magician in him. I look at Carpenter, where there's always some kind of, there's something that's just so ultra realistic in many ways. Mm-hmm. He presents characters in a real situation, and then the fantastical happens around them. But when I always think of my favorite scenes is at the end of The Thing, where his Childs is sitting there, and the Kurt Russell character is sitting there, and they're both just exhausted, and like, are you on? I don't know. Are you? And they just have a drink, and that's it. And I think I'm like, that's the way you end a movie. That's my favorite way.
Well, and that was a big part of movies in the 70s. Mm-hmm. You couldn't end a movie in the 70s. You had to leave people hanging, or you couldn't have your stock happy ending Hollywood. That came back into the 80s. Yeah. But I'm noticing that more and more now with the indie market. And I was a huge indie film fan in the 70s growing up, and I'm glad to see it come around, because especially in the horror genre, there are some real gems out there. These are ones that are not being promoted by studios. And with avenues now like Netflix and Redbox and even streaming services, right, and stuff because there's a need for so much product now. Even on some of these cable channels, you're finding some. One that comes to mind, since we're talking about horror, and the bizarre stuff really gets me. That's the stuff that I don't want to see the same thing over and over again. It was a little-known film called Frankenstein's Army.
I haven't seen that one.
It is, man, if you can, it's gruesome. It's very graphic, and it's about a Nazi scientist during World War II trying to make super soldiers out of the damnedest things.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and because from a 40s point of view, thinking back, okay, what kind of technology did they have back then? And it's almost like a warped sense of steampunk. It's really got a weird feel to it, but it's warning, it is very graphic. And,
those are the elements of humanity's horror that I love to delve into. I study. I'm a big fan of World War II. Yeah. The D-Day museums in New Orleans. My brother used to work there, and before he became a doctor, and I used to go hang out, and you meet some of these guys who served there, and you hear you want to talk about real horror, man. Boy, Beach of Normandy. What Spielberg prior, nothing. The guy goes, that was nothing. He goes, I saw worse. And I was like, what? He goes, son, I ain't telling you. Just not going to tell you. He said, I can't. I don't want to. But then you hear about the Nazi and the experiments and all that. And then I think about the movie you're telling me about and going, you know what? Those are things that Hollywood won't promote. I don't know why anymore. Or they just don't take chances anymore.
No, they don't. No, they're out of
Netflix. Netflix is kicking butt because they're not using the traditional model of, okay, let's run it through the machine. Let's see what happens. Let's get a producer here, producer there, producer there.
Well, that's happening on the TV side, too. Yeah. But luckily, guys like HBO and Showtime and Stars and stuff are getting into the... Penny Dreadful, I drew a blank. That was the show I wanted to mention. That really sort of played up the whole Grand Guignol type 19th century horror. But you would not see stuff like that on traditional television broadcast channels because they don't take chances. anymore, but now these guys can get away with it.
American Gods. I've been watching that. That's it's got these crazy. But at the same time, I look at the system is also promoting, like Tom Cruise did The Mummy, and they want to do the whole Dark World with Frankenstein, and then we're gonna go back to all these properties we own. But they're really, I'm like, are you doing? There's no heart in it. That's what I love about Indian horror is there's a sense of what I love and passionate about, what I want to do. When you put your love, labor, and passion into something, it's gonna. If you really give it your all, it's going to come out awesome.
There's a great little film that came out in the early 70s, or I'm sorry, in the early 80s, and I don't even know if it's available on DVD, but it's developed quite a cult following over the last 30-some years. And I remember I went to the movie theater, and it was, again, that was in days where you had multi-screens, so sometimes you would find a little indie film playing on one of the screens, and it was called The Deadly Spawn. And some of you may be familiar with it. It was shot by a young filmmaker, a group of guys up in Boston. That it was back in the days where they said, "Hey, let's just make a movie. Let's just get all of our." They got a lot of community theater people together, and they got the whole small. They lived in a small town in Massachusetts, and they all got together and shot this. And again, no CGI. This was all practical effects about this meteor that landed, and these slug-type creatures, like slugs with teeth.
I think I've seen that.
This is and it was.
I
walked in there not knowing what to expect, but it just said the deadly spawn. The aliens have returned, and I thought, oh, maybe this is a takeoff on Alien, because this was just a couple of years after that. I didn't know any better, and walked into this and walked out going, this is a ghastly film, but it is so brilliant. And they probably shot it on less than $20,000. Fact that if that, I don't even know if it was that, and it has developed just an unbelievable cult following.
It's a feature.
If you Google The Deadly Spawn, you will see all kinds of sites on it. People went nuts over this movie.
So it's a feature then, right?
It's a feature film.
Wow.
And it was just sort of an underground cult that has spread. And those are the kind of films, those little gems that you find in the horror genre. That's how, when there were video stores, back in the old VHS days. Yes, I'm dating myself here. I always went to the horror section first because that's where you found some of the coolest little gems out there.
See, for my film school was Blockbuster. When I
lived at Blockbuster.
When I was working, I was in graduate school. I was getting my MBA. I didn't work. I lived at home, so I could just study full time and because that's how. But I'm a night owl. That's my nature. I'm a New Orleans night owl. I have to take classes at night. I could not get up for the life of me for the longest time to get up in the morning. It just wasn't in my DNA. And so my parents couldn't understand it, but when they saw the 4.0s, they're like, whatever you got to do, keep doing it. And I would spend all night long studying, till like 3 or 4 in the morning. But in the meantime, I would give myself a luxury. And my luxury was class gets out at 8 p.m., go home, go to Blockbuster.
Yeah.
I'd go rent anything. A lot of times it was always the fantastical, horror, science fiction, whatever, fantasy, whatever I could, or whatever the latest cool movie was coming out or something. But there came a point where I was literally in my neighborhood, like, the guy goes, "Gosh, you've rented everything." And I'm like, "What's left?" He goes, "We got these like indie shorts over here, like these composite films of just." I said, "I'll take it. I'll just something to watch." One, I wanted to decompress from going to grad school. It's very intense. 2, subconsciously, I think my own, I was trying to tell myself, you don't want to be a businessman. You don't want to be into high tech. You want to be a filmmaker. You want to be a storyteller. And you duck and dodge that. And I have I love horror and I love science fiction, and these are things I'm very passionate about. I'm also passionate about just stories. And I am just I fought against myself for so long until a couple of years ago when I just really sat down as a consultant. I was traveling, constantly bored in a hotel room. And when you're bored in a hotel room, you're trying to find things to do. So either one, you're at the bar, or you got to do working out or do something constructive. So I said, I'm going to pick 2. Not the bar. Well, every hour now at the bar. But I would definitely work out. I got to kind of maintain healthy. But I sat there and I didn't know how to write a script. And especially when you're talking about doing horror and science fiction, forget it. It's, you read books and you're looking at it started writing, I just wrote. Didn't know what I was writing, but I just trying to get this story. The first one I ever did, which was a full feature. Eventually, I got a little smarter and said, I'm going to just spend a little money here. And I got somebody to mentor me. Now, this girl was specifically, her genre was horror.
Nice. There you go.
And she's very much, she's constantly won awards in indie filmmaking. I was very lucky to have her. Her name was L.M. Harder. She's one of the best in the industry. She can mentor, and she has a master's in this from the University of Texas, and just taught me how to write. One, how to write a screenplay, how to correctly write it. Two, how you do dystopian and horror. You know, how things are set up and how you build it and how you have to have your characters, characters rise, they fall. Something supernatural, something incredible goes against them and tests them. The hero's journey. You got to incorporate that. But she's like, sometimes you need to figure out how not to go to the hero's journey. It's been overdone.
It's very true.
And so you want to find ways to make it your voice. And she was always, her horror stuff is off the chart great. And learning from her, I finally got, and we went through, she helped me, not writing for me, but really showing me how to write my story. And I wrote this script that was very horrific in many ways without ever really showing too much blood and guts, but there's enough in there where you go, oh, at the end, without giving anything away, you go, and this is a franchise that's based that I drew from Gattaca, I drew from Blade Runner, and I drew from probably my most favorite horror movie of all time, Soylent Green.
Oh, that's very underrated, yeah. Always made me hungry to watch that movie.
Way ahead of its time.
Oh, Chuck Heston, yeah.
Oh, way ahead of its time. And if you've never seen Soylent Green, that is a must-watch.
It's a classic.
It is a horror movie.
Edward G. Robinson's last film.
Yeah. And when I take all those elements and she showed me where to go with it and how to take that, and how to write for that genre for horror, I was so hooked. Now I was like, okay, once I entered into the film to the Austin Film Festival, and they picked me up. They're like, hey, you're coming to this thing, and you learn and you start learning. And the greatest lessons I learned from that point, it jump was, I'll never forget the guy who produced Everybody Loves Raymond. I got to sit on a panel with him to watch a panel. He goes, all of you out there, just don't give up, but you can't sit around and do nothing. You absolutely have to film something.
Yeah, you have to be proactive.
If you don't, you can write and write and write, but it doesn't really help you if you don't film something, because everyone in LA, they're filming. If they're writers, they're filming, and it doesn't take much to film. Just get out there. Doesn't matter. Go round some friends up. I was lucky, since we were living in Texas at the time, we had access to something called Short Film Texas, which was a fantastic way. You throw your script up there, your idea, and you get 10,000 actors who want to be in it.
Nice.
And then you get like one guy who wants to do the technical. But I was lucky enough. I had a guy named Tom Moore who I was so appreciative. I thank him every day. And of course, my producing partner, Jose Pimentel, who did my scoring music. These guys were all helping me out. And there's so many people I could go on and on about in my movie. They ended up grabbing on, hey, I got a friend that does this. I got a friend that does that. I got one guy who has all the sound equipment, who has the lighting equipment. And we're going to make your movie. We're going to make this horror movie. And,
Nice.
and that got me here. And that's hopefully we're going to continue on.
We will. I want to ask some of you guys out here, because you've been very good about listening to all of our stories. Favorite horror film? See if you've got one, it's that one that anytime you see it's coming on or you've got access to it, I got to watch it again. There's got to be one. You're sitting in on a panel about horror, so let's find out, what kind of horror do you guys like? Because I think it's different for everybody. I think it addresses everybody a little different. Oh, we've got the mic. I love catching Dave off guard here. Oh my God,
Go ahead.
I got to get another mic here quick, don't I? Okay.
Actually, nothing really scares me except The Exorcist. I tend to laugh at horror movies. I appreciate them. I love them, but nothing actually scares me because I think the element that maybe it actually could happen. And because I didn't grow up Catholic, I always thought there was a little something going on there that maybe the rest of us didn't know. So
It's true. There is.
yeah, it's true. Yes, The Exorcist.
I like a lot of horror movies, but the one that really gets me to this day, I remember seeing it when I was I've always been interested in it since I was 6, but I didn't get to see it till I was 12 because it was so R-rated. And it's called The Descent, and it's from
The Descent.
2006.
Yeah, the Splunkers,
And it gave me nightmares for 2 weeks, very bloody, and the fact that it makes me never want to go exploring in a cave in real life.
I was going to say, you don't want to go up to Ruby Falls or anything like that.
No, and those crawlers, those humanoid things, I dreamed about them. It's just really scariest thing I've seen. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Let's pass it on here. Yeah.
Don't give it to her. What's your favorite horror movie?
Favorite one? Poltergeist.
Oh, I thought it was Titanic.
Horror movie. Well,
Titanic was a horror
That's
movie.
actually a pretty good film. I actually that was one that I think when I went to see it for the first time, I thought I'd be disappointed, but I walked away thinking, hey, that's pretty good. Because I love ghost films.
Oh, yeah, Poltergeist is...
Poltergeist scares me to this.
There's some great moments in that film.
Very
I can't
much.
watch it alone, and I won't watch it alone.
I was like that with
Tonight.
Exorcist. Exorcist disturbed me.
Exorcist is...
That's when both of those scare hell out of me.
All right.
I was impressed that you said Prince of Darkness, because that's always been...
It's a great film.
It's such a great film. It's such a great tie-in with horror and sci-fi. Clearly horror is dominant. So I'd say Prince of Darkness and then any giant bug movie from the 50s. The Black Scorpion was on.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
We talked about that in our premiere episode of the podcast 2 years ago. Yeah, Black Scorpion and Giant Behemoth, the other classics. Love that film.
I just remember the 50-foot man from those eras.
Do I know?
The 50-foot man, the guy who got hit with radiation and...
Oh, yeah, the Amazing Colossal Man.
Yeah, that's it.
And the War of the Colossal Beast after that. Absolutely. Oh, they had to shoot something in what was it, Las Vegas? That was great. What place to put it.
Those were movies I got to watch because my parents had a little black and white TV in my parents' store, and so you sit there and put it on the old UHF channel. You probably don't know what a UHF channel is. And you sit there, and that was it. It was you get to watch that in like either a kung fu theater or monster movie mashup.
That's right.
And that was
matinee, midnight monster movie.
And I'd be watching these, and and my brother and I would go outside, and we'd take these rulers my mom had for her workshop, and we'd start beating each other and pretending we were these characters.
Well, we're going to be talking about that in the next panel at 2:00 because that's me. That's those old. I mean, I've made a profession out of it. And so, if you like old monster movies, pass the word. We're going to be talking about that on the horror movies that defined our lives, and they have the ability of doing that. They really do. Well, thanks, folks, for letting us ramble on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gus.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jim.
We'll see you on the next one. All
Bye,
right.
y'all.